Hi, and welcome to the Creating Your Conditions podcast, a work of understanding the conditions we are given, the conditions we create, and the conditions we have yet to accomplish. You can find us at Creating Your Conditions on Instagram. My name is Vin. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am your host. This is the first episode of the podcast, and I'm excited to be interviewing my peers, friends, and mentors for this show. So, my guest for this first episode is Nicole Verdes. They use they and she pronouns. Nicole's professional journey has been marked by unexpected twists, from working in a hospital and a trust company to facing 2 years of unemployment during the pandemic. Navigating these diverse environments as a queer individual was deeply personal, ultimately leading Nicole to find their calling as the managing director of Lambda Archives of San Diego, San Diego's only LGBTQ community archives. Each step, with its unique challenges and discoveries, has profoundly shaped her approach to creating inclusive and supportive spaces. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
How's it going?
Great. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Nicole and I used to be coworkers, and so sometimes we'd get left in a room and we'd just be found laughing for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Trying not to do that.
Let's see how we do.
Thanks for being So thanks for being on the podcast. So let's start us off with, what conditions were you given? Tell us about your background. You can interpret that as talking about your youth, talking about your childhood, or talking about your ethnic background too.
Sure. So it's impossible for me to tell really the story of my life as it relates to work or my career path without talking about my family first. So my family immigrated from, or fled, I should say, communist Cuba. And when my mom was 12 years old, and when they came to this country, they were very enamored with capitalism and the idea of making as much money as possible for themselves and for the family. So that became really their focus. They first went to Miami, Florida, and then made the move to Culver City, California, which is in Los Angeles. And almost all of them, my mom and her 5 siblings, almost all of them got jobs with General Telephone Company, which is now Verizon Wireless, but at the time it was General Telephone. That's also where my mom met. Yeah, that's also where my mom met my biological father, who has since passed. But they were so, despite the fact that my grandparents, brilliant people, my grandfather was an engineer and had a degree. My grandmother, who never worked a day in her life, but still had a college degree in Russian literature, I believe. They, somehow that value of education didn't really get passed down. So out of 6 children, my mom is the only one that has a college degree. And I have something like 16 or 17 cousins. I think there are only 3 of us that have graduated from college. So when I graduated from high school, I had this weird experience. Maybe it was from the TV shows I had watched growing up, where I just kind of assumed, okay, I've graduated from high school. Where are you, talking to my parents, where are you sending me to college? And what car am I going to drive to get there? And what kind of apartment are you going to set me up with? How does this all work? And they were like, no, you need to get a job. So I was shocked and I was devastated. I didn't really know that. I don't know why I made that assumption that everything was going to be handed over to me in terms of education or that kind of thing. So my stepdad, who worked for the county of San Bernardino at the time, basically he would train people to get jobs after they were either formerly incarcerated or something like that. He had a lot of connections in the high desert where my parents still live, and basically said, I found this great job for you working at a local hospital, and you're going to be working in their human resources department, and this is what you're going to do. So 1 week after I graduated from high school, I started working full time, and I have been ever since graduated from high school, with the exception of the 2 years during the pandemic that I didn't work, been working full time continuously. And, college would come later in its own way to me. It was important for me to do it, but it took me a really long time. I think it took 4 different community colleges in 4 different counties. And then finally transferring over to Cal State San Marcos, where I graduated, to get a degree. And it wasn't really important to me, but it was also important to me. Independence was very important to me, which is why I think that even though I didn't envision myself jumping right into working full time and that kind of thing, it served me well because I really wanted to get out of the high desert and start my own life. I wanted to be able to do my own thing without relying on other people to do it for me. So I did work at the hospital in Apple Valley, California for almost 2 years.
Okay, okay, hold on, hold on. Yeah. But I have some questions first.
Okay.
Um, I think it was really interesting that you started talking about like how it's impossible for you to talk about your background without talking about your family. I love how that also just, you know, feeds into your work, I'm sure. But like, have you always known like your family's history, or like what did that process look like? Because you were like, I have like 16 cousins, XYZ here, and then like my family did X, Y, and Z to get here. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to ask about that first.
Yeah, like I've always known about the family history. I guess you could say generically. I know that they came here from Cuba. I know how they got here. I know that some of them came before others came. I know that they lied and said they were going on vacation and essentially left everything behind in Cuba. And then when they got here, they just stayed. I know, though, I have always known that story and that narrative. But I think as I have gotten older and become more of like a free thinking adult and kind of gotten to see my family in a different light, the meaning attached to their story has changed for me. I'm sure the meaning is different for every single person that experienced it, but for me, that's why I brought up that they were so enamored with capitalism, because it
Hmm.
does seem to be a central part of their story. They would never use those words in a million years, um, but that is essentially what happened was, we're in this new place for a reason, and that reason is that we're not being controlled by a communist government and we can go get jobs and make a ton of money and have nice houses and things like that. So the meaning attached to their story has changed for me, and it's a meaning that I put on it. Just like I said, other people in my family, we all have the same facts attached to the story, but what it means
Mm.
to different people is probably very, very different depending on who you talk to.
Ooh, I love that. I also wanted to ask you why did you feel such a strong desire to leave the high desert? Because you mentioned that once you got like that job and also like college pathway, you're like, I need to get out of there. So I'm just curious why you felt that.
A lot of different reasons. The high desert was really restrictive in terms of employment. That's something that I still see when I go up to visit my parents. In order to work anywhere outside of the high desert, which has limited employment opportunities, you have to drive on the Cajon Pass, which is kind of treacherous. I did it for 2 years. Not fun. It's torrential rain, it's fog where you can't see in front of you. There are always pileups. There are people flying off the Cajon Pass. It's like this very dangerous thing. So it's
Whoa.
kind of a isolating experience to be there. There was something inside of me from the time I can remember that always I had this pull to want to live somewhere urban, to live by the beach, to be able to walk to restaurants. That was always appealing to me. Like sometimes when I would watch movies growing up and I would see these movies of people like living in New York and they would, walk out of their brownstone and go down the street to meet a friend at a bar or something. That's something that you couldn't really do in Hesperia in the high desert. The weather is makes it difficult to walk anywhere, regardless of whether it's hot or cold. They're both very extreme. They experience very extreme weather, and things are not exactly right around the corner. With things being several miles away to go to dinner or whatever it is, and
Mm.
it the reality of their situation there in the high desert is that, let's say that, like, I consider myself a long distance walker. It's the one type of exercise that I always engage in. Even when I lived in the desert, it was the last thing I wanted to do because a lot of the streets there don't have, it wasn't safe to do it, and I'm sure that I would have done
Yeah.
it if it was like, oh, I can just go over here. But it wasn't, it's not the type of place that you're gonna, it's not like living where I live now where I can throw on shorts and flip flops and walk to get, Mexican food or, any type of food really, just being able to walk there. I wanted something bigger for my life. I feel like I wanted, a lot of action and adventure. And I feel like being in San Diego, I always pictured myself living in Los Angeles. I did think that that was where I was going to end up because I used to go there growing up, but I ended up in San Diego instead. But I feel like San Diego has that good blend for me of like it's close to a lot of things, the beach, the mountains, the desert. I can walk to things, I can ride my bike to things, and that's something that wasn't available there.
How were you exposed to like the idea of living somewhere that was walkable or was more urban? Um, if you had been raised in the high desert.
Yeah, so I think that it was a couple of different things. Like I said, I think it had a lot to do with movies, the culture that I was absorbing when I was growing up. When I would see that, it was always like, oh my God, what a great experience to be able to live somewhere that you could go to a museum really easily or, to the beach or whatever it is. I got it from movies. And then also, um, although, my parents still live in the high desert, they did a fair amount of traveling locally. Like they would go to Los Angeles or San Diego, or the very first time I was ever on an airplane, my
Gotcha.
mom and I flew to San Francisco. So I think seeing those early memories that I can recall, I remember thinking this is where I'm going to end up. San Francisco was on my list for a really long time of places that I wanted to end up just because it was unbelievable to me that people were living their lives in such a different way than I was, and it just seemed better. It seemed a lot more fun. There were a lot of options, things to do at night, which also in the high desert things close pretty early. So few
Yeah.
options, and the ones that are there, it's a sports bar that's not entirely safe. It's not like this.
Oh
They
yeah.
don't have a lot of options there.
I got you. I got you. It's cool that you were exposed to it. That your parents like took you to other places.
Yeah,
Um,
it made a huge impact on me for sure.
yeah. I think I had one more question about like your, I guess your background, and then we can move to the next section of like your career and stuff that you already started getting into. It's you said earlier, and it kind of made me chuckle because I didn't know this about you, but you asked them after graduating high school, like, what are you gonna do for me for college and like for housing and stuff. And so, how did it shift from that framework of like, hey, I thought you were gonna set me up to like, oh, I need to become independent and like get out of here.
I think I simply didn't have a choice. It really
Mm,
just came down to that for a period of time. Something that I always tell my wife. My wife is 9 years younger than I am, so sometimes it's I think difficult for her to comprehend this, but I always tell her, when I was in my late teens, early 20s and I was working, um I was still living with my parents and barely making money, and I used to sell CDs and cassette tapes to, like, Sam Goody or whatever they would buy, like, used CDs and used tapes just so I could have maybe $20 for the weekend or something. It
mm,
became like a necessity for me to work. It was like, this will not work. My plan of getting out of here, my plan of going to school, my plan of having all these adventures, it's not going to happen here. It was just too limiting. So I think I became almost in a weird way like the model of what my family had anticipated, or some of my family had anticipated, that you need to get a job now, and I did that for a very very long time to just be able to have personal experiences that I wanted and live in the places that I wanted, and that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Hustling to make $20 CDs. That's an era thing. I did that in high school too.
Yeah,
Just like cut CDs for my friends and be like, hey, you want to do this? Want to buy a CD for $5? And I would just like rent them from the library and then just cut them, like burn them on my
right,
computer.
right. Yeah.
I got you. Cool. So then so you're like hustling with these CDs and trying to figure a way out. How did you get to like, the community colleges that you attempted at and then to San Marcos? Since you chose
Mhm.
a pathway of education to get to a career.
Yeah, so when I was still living in the high desert with my parents and they'd got me the job at the hospital and I was working full
Right.
time there, there was Victor Valley College in the high desert. And at that time, if I remember correctly, and I could be off by a few dollars, but I believe it was something like $12 a unit to take a class there. So it was possible for me, even though I was making minimum wage working at the hospital. It was $4.25 an hour. That's what I was making. Um, which I think ended up being something like $600 a month working full time. Even on that salary, I could manage to take at least one class every semester and pay for it myself. And I was so, now that I look back on it, sitting in a classroom was so difficult for me for so many reasons. It was really challenging. Like I like to get out and really do things and do like hands-on things, and it's easier for me to learn that way. But by the time I got to where I was going to community college, I was like, the last thing I'm going to do is take anything that I ever took in the first 18 years of my life. So everything was off the wall. Everything was, photography 101, fine art, intro to fine art, um, just anything that was just that felt different. Even that I think is a pretty good reflection of what was to come, because I was like, I
Oh yeah.
cannot do math, English, history like one more time. I don't care how much you try to sell it to me that it's a requirement. And actually, if you do look at my transcripts before I transferred to Cal State San Marcos, the last classes I took before that transfer happened were all the math classes, all the science classes, and it was rough, because I kept them for the very last. I avoided them for so long. But yeah, it started at Victor Valley College, and then some units at Riverside City College, Irvine Valley College, and finally Mesa College was my last stop on the community college experience before I transferred over.
The community college experience sounds like such a dope album.
Yeah.
That is like your personal archive of memories right there.
Yes. Yeah, it totally is.
Is wow, I didn't know this about you, so it's really cool to learn it. Obviously, it's not cool because it doesn't sound like it was fun. You're obviously triangling and error a lot of stuff.
Right.
It is really cool to hear you like engage with your art interests, because like now you're an archivist and you like preserve all of these things. Super cool.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, like the avoidance that you had for like math and science. Are there other parts of your life where you have seen yourself like avoid a thing and then it's like, oh shoot, I have to face it anyway? Like you're like, I am not going to deal with this for X amount of time. And then like before you know it, it's knocking on your door, unironically.
I think coming out was that way for me. It was like I knew it was there. I knew it was something I had to deal with. I knew that if I didn't start living an authentic life, things would explode, and that's actually exactly what ended up happening. And I tried really hard to not let it happen. I was like, I would just rather not deal with it and talk to my family about it and that kind of thing. But that's literally the only other thing I can think of. Usually, I like to get things out of the way, so when they come up, I like to deal with them and just do it. But yeah, aside from pushing those subjects onto the last bit of community college, probably coming out was the other one that I just kind of buried, and then did it when literally I had no other choice in the matter.
If you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you came out to your family?
I actually have come out to them two different times, so I have kind of an interesting path that I don't think a lot of people, not even you, I don't know if you know this or not, but I came out to my family when I was 18, and it didn't go so well. That was 1996, 1997 maybe, and, it was a very different time, for sure. I can't believe that I'm saying that because I've seen so much of that change happen in my lifetime, but it was, really difficult for my family to digest, and then also through that process, I ended up learning some things about my family that I didn't know, until I came out, which, like, for example, one of my family members that I came out to then recommended that I go to a church that had a program for people like me, that kind of thing.
Like
So it was not.
conversion therapy?
Yeah, they basically, the
Oh,
whole church had like a
okay.
program designated to, like, you go to therapy, and in therapy you recreate coming through the birth
Got
canal
it.
because they try to rewire your brain through that kind of thing. And I was like, what? I was just so, I don't know if I just was naive to think that everybody would be supportive. I didn't understand it. I was completely mind blowing, and I believed at the time, I was like, well, my family will be supportive no matter what I do, and that wasn't the case. But so I came out to them when I was 18, and then when I was 30, I actually married a man and had like a big Catholic wedding in Mexico that my family came to. It was a big, huge party. And he and I were married for a couple of years. And I met Megan, my wife, when I was married to him. Um, and it just, like I said, it kind of became, you could argue that I had a choice in the matter, but it really just exploded in my face. It wasn't something that I could like, I couldn't live in that life anymore. As much as I, loved my husband and we're still really good friends to this day, it just was, I couldn't do it. I had pretty near what you would consider like a textbook nervous breakdown, I think is what they're called. I was just constantly going to the emergency room, telling them I couldn't breathe. I got it. Something's wrong. I have brain cancer. Do the scans. Give me an MRI. Give me another one. Give me another one. And then finally, after like a year of all these episodes, they were like, "I think that you're having panic attacks." And I couldn't
Right.
believe it. I could not believe that. I was like, I don't think so. I think I actually have cancer in my brain, my face, my neck, and my entire body. And you are, telling like a doctor, like, you are just not doing your job. And he was like, no, he's like, I'll give you medication for a panic attack. Try it. And if it doesn't work, or even if it does work, come back and talk to me. And he was right.
You try this. Let me know.
Yes, he was and he was probably the best doctor in that huge, it lasted over a year. It was exhausting for everybody around me. My family didn't know what to do. My husband at the time didn't know what to do. He's just like, I don't know. It got to that point where he was like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm at a loss. Like, you're inventing like illnesses. You're in the emergency room. They don't want you there because there's clearly not an emergency, but you're like this, you know, losing it. It was really wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was like I was pushed to the point where I could not. And the panic attacks went away after I basically left. My husband got my own apartment and started actually living my life the way I wanted to be living it. It was interesting.
So you mentioned the conversion therapy, like, or whatever those classes they made you go to at church. Was that what you were trying to convince yourself? Like, there's got to be something wrong with me. You think that had an
Yeah.
influence on this?
Yeah. I actually didn't go to any classes. I did go to church with my family member that had recommended that I go. And I was so, thank goodness, there was still a part of me that was like, these people are not right. Like, this is something weird's going on in this church and I don't want to be a part of it. So I very politely went with her. We went to dinner after. Thanks for taking me. Appreciate you. Thanks for looking out for me. Love you. It was very like I was trying to say the words that I was taught, that you're supposed to be respectful and everything, but I left kind of thinking
Mm.
that that didn't feel good at all, and I don't think I want to pursue that, even though that offer was on the table. So I just decided, no, I don't think so. But I think there definitely was a part of me that's like, I just did not want to deal with my family. I just did not want to sit down and say, look, at the time, I would have said I'm gay. That's what I said to them when I came out, but I didn't want to deal with it. There was also a lot of pressure when my grandmother, sorry, I feel like this is turning into a different podcast now.
That's okay. It's part of your life, That's what it is. Doesn't have to be just career.
I loved my grandmother so much. I think about her all the time. I miss her so much, but there was also a lot of pressure, I think, when she was alive, that either we meaning me and other people in my family, whether that pressure came from pressure we put on ourselves or whether it came from her. I don't remember her ever specifically saying anything that I can recall that was like problematic or anything like that, but she lived to be 102, almost 103, and there was this pressure that as long as she was alive, you were kind of you were going to keep it status quo in every possible way, that you were going to, behave, I think is
You were
probably it,
expected to marry a man.
and have children. That was I think a really big thing too, and very eye-opening, that when my ex-husband and I got married, we didn't want to have children. We had talked about it. And when I dropped that knowledge on my family, they were just it was almost the same reaction as when I came out to them. It was they were completely unsupportive in the same exact way. It was like, "What do you mean? Like, you this is what you have to do. You can't just not do that, and, you fought so hard to be here. You overcame your demons, and you found this nice guy, and now you're here, and now you're not gonna have kids? Like, what do you mean?" It was just
Mm.
and working, being financially independent, I think that was also a big thing for me and for them. It was like, you can take a leave of absence from your job to have a baby. You can do this, and we all had kids and worked full time. You can do it too. And I'm like, well, a lot of you were, kind of left your kids. Yeah, you did do it, but you also worked late hours leaving your kids unattended. And that's why my cousins and I crack up when we're like, yeah, when we were 12, we were stealing cars and driving to the Baskin Robbins and, you know, driving back because nobody knew that we were doing any of those things because nobody was watching
There
us.
was there's no supervision.
No, there wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I got you. Thanks for sharing all of that.
Mhm.
I don't think I knew about your ex-husband.
Mhm.
That's that's wild. That's wild stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but very much along the veins of when you try to convince yourself of something and deep down it's really not right. Like circumstances will come up that's like, well, let's correct that. And it's not gonna be comfortable the longer like you wait for that conversation to happen. And
Yeah,
I
and I
understand
also
that
think
very
that
well.
yeah, and I think that there is I I know it might sound strange because you feel like you have control over those things, but I can tell you with 1000% certainty that I just assumed that my husband and I would be married until the day we died, and that it was not gonna be like a problem for me to face this part of myself ever again. And then one day the panic attack started, and I had no control. It's like, and I didn't understand it. My husband didn't
Because your body
understand it.
knew, your body was holding all of that.
My body was holding it, and I remember just crying so hard, and I was trying everything, and it was the first time I had ever done acupuncture, and I remember trying to really hold it together when I went in to get acupuncture because I was just crying like every day at the time. It was really a difficult time, and I don't remember the acupuncturist what she saw in. I think she was either, sometimes they look at your mouth. If you've ever had acupuncture, that's something that they do. And she said to me, and it was the first time I had ever seen her and the first time I had ever been to acupuncture, and she knew absolutely nothing about my personal life. She told me that my what she was seeing in my mouth was consistent with in Eastern medicine. The I guess you could say the diagnosis was that there was something I was trying to say that I couldn't say.
Ooh.
And I just started bawling, and she was like, "I'm so sorry." She put down her clipboard. She was like, "I didn't mean." And I'm like, "No, it's not you. I'm going through something right now, and I can't believe you just said those words to me." But that was exactly what she told me. And I just remember thinking, this can't be. Because I was so tired of like the doctors telling me you're having panic attacks. And then the acupuncturist is like, there's something you have to say that is stuck. It was really heavy. It was really just incredible. And it didn't, my body basically said no more. Like, you're not going to put yourself through this anymore. You cannot sustain this anymore. No more.
Yeah. Your body was like, I'm gonna take it out on you now until you
Yes.
figure this out and like verbally say it to
Right.
yourself.
Right.
Wow. Was that before like she even started like acupuncturing you? That was like the intake?
Yes. It was the intake. And I'm so good at
Man.
like, my default is kind of stoicism. Like, even if something is really not right. Like, it's usually just a very, what some people might perceive to be like a blank stare or just nothing, but it's all going on the inside. And so I was trying so hard not to lose it to begin with. And then when she said that, I just lost it, which is very rare for me to like lose it like that in front of somebody. Losing it meaning like crying and that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, Eastern medicine is very different and it listens in a very different way than
Yeah.
Western medicine. So That sounds like a pretty big turning point in your life. Like, what was happening career wise at the time? Were you still at that trust that you were talking about?
No, so I did hospital for almost 2 years, the trust company for 4 years, and the trust company, that was kind of an interesting accident, and I feel like all my career has been more or less accidental, but,
And
there was
what age were you at the trust? And then say your age at that
so,
time.
yeah,
That's
the
cool.
hospital, I was 18 and I left when I was 20. I actually well, actually, technically, I left the hospital when I was 19, and I started working at the trust company in San Bernardino on my 20th birthday. Um, and I was still living in Hesperia in the high desert, and that's when I did the commute, back and forth.
Hmm.
And really, it's not that many miles, so not a long commute, but the Cajon Pass made it a little squirrely. So, anyways, I worked for the trust company for 4 years, and then it was very corporate. It was wildly corporate, like even and a very different time. Some of the things that went on there that I think back on, I'm like, that would not fly for 1 second in any environment, not corporate, nonprofit, or otherwise. It was a very weird place to be. But I had found out that through that work, there was a small company here in San Diego that did the same work, but it was a lot smaller, a lot less corporate, and there were only 2 employees and they were younger women, and I thought, "Well, this could be cool." Like I could essentially just like transfer my job down to San Diego and I'd be working and living by the beach and that's really what I wanted. So, when I was 24, I moved to San Diego and got my first ever apartment on my own and started working in Pacific Beach. And eventually that office would move to La Jolla. And that's where at that job, I stayed for over 17 years.
Got it.
And,
Okay.
and that's where I was when that also was a interesting element to that part of my time in my career because started there as a very private person. I wanted them to know nothing about me. And it took me years to come out to them there, and I did, and it didn't really go great there either. My coming out experiences were not always great, but I also was not connecting with people in places that aligned with my values and my goals and everything, so I was just picking the wrong people to trust with anything, really. So I came out there, and then I also met my husband when I worked there, and I divorced my husband when I
Yeah.
worked there, and I married my wife when I worked there. So I'm sure, knowing what I know about the people that worked at that place now, they probably look back and go, "God, what an unstable freak." I just don't think they could comprehend, and I don't think that they knew that the environment there was also not supportive enough for me to really live authentically in the workplace either. But yeah.
I mean, I think they can think whatever they want, but the truth is your truth and your story. And you didn't feel safe coming out in so many places in your life. So, like, why would you even bother trying to explain it to them, when you already felt animosity at home and then there too? Like,
Right.
you learn that you're at your pace and you are where you are now, and that's what
Yeah.
matters.
And
But
it's not that
yeah.
I'm giving any credence or like any weight to what they're thinking, but now that
Yeah.
I've been far enough removed, I'm like, I can absolutely tell you that they had such a failure or a lack of understanding. For example, the rain year of San Diego Pride, which I believe was 2015, which was beautiful. I was there, as were a lot of other people, and it was raining and people were just having the best time and it was great. And when I went to work on Monday, um my one of my coworkers came up to me and said, made a really weird remark, and I knew exactly what he was getting at, but essentially that the fact that people were trying to advocate for gay marriage at the time, because that's what was going on at the time, obviously upset God, and that is why the rain happened in San Diego for Pride that year. That was the
Mm,
exact remark. He said it in a different way, but he didn't mince words, and that was the environment there.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's ridiculous. He literally rained on your parade, like, the Monday after. Like, that's so messed up.
Yeah, and it was like this really deflating. He couldn't wait to come over and tell me. He couldn't wait to, "Oh, did you hang out in Hill?" He couldn't directly ask me, "Hey, did you go to Pride?" over the weekend. He just thought maybe I had been there, which I was, and then said, "It got a lot of rain." And I was like, "Yeah, it sure did." What? And then the reason
Mm,
it rained is because, that kind of thing.
yeah, I got you. It's wild. You jumped around a lot. I've got a lot of context for your life that I didn't have before. Let's pick up when you left this corporate job. Like what led to that? So you'd been
Which
there 17 years. So like, when did it like it always felt a little off because of your identity, I'm sure, but when did it feel off in terms of like what you're doing day to day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, um, for additional context about that job in particular, it was owned by one person who was a woman that had started the company on her own in 1996, I believe, which was when I graduated from high school.
So,
And she started it as this small company, and it just exploded. It started getting really big. And then at the same time, I'm going to say, so in 2000, this is very important information. In 2018, I joined the board of directors at Lambda Archives, which is the local LGBTQ plus community archives here. And it really started to open things up for me in terms of not only opportunity, but also the way I just saw the world differently. I was all of a sudden involved with this LGBTQ plus organization, and really that was a huge part of what I really wanted my whole life, was to help people or to be involved somehow. And so in 2018 I joined the board, and in 2019, the summer of 2019, I had submitted a proposal to present something at the Alms conference in Berlin, and it was like a queer history conference. And my proposal was accepted. So my partner and I went to Berlin, and I presented at this awesome conference, and it was just an amazing experience, and it kind of made me think like I could actually do this somehow. I could actually, this is awesome. Like, aside from my corporate job, I took a week off of vacation PTO from that corporate job so I could go to Berlin, give this presentation at this huge conference where people from all over the world are there talking about queer history as it relates to their unique place in the world, and things like that. And that was a huge shift, I think, for me internally. And what's interesting is, so that was in July of 2019. In August of 2019, my boss, after having worked there for 17 years, came into my little like cubicle one day to me, kind of out of nowhere, and said, "I really want to talk to you because I don't think that you are." She said something like, "I don't think that you're happy here." And
wow.
I don't, it was almost laughable because it was like, of course. Like, have you not been following along the bouncy balls? It was not a pleasant place to work. I will tell you that. It was wretched. There were several people that worked there and left abruptly because they were like, "Look, I just can't work in this environment." Um but again, my go-to is kind of like this stoic, like, even though I'm just raging on the inside, on the outside, it just appears that I'm showing up to work every day. I'm getting there on time. I'm staying as long as I'm supposed to. I'm getting the job done. And in that moment, I lost it. And I essentially started saying, "No shit, this is a horrible place to work. You are a nasty person. I hate the job itself. There are no redeeming qualities about like working here aside from the fact that I make pretty good money, but even that fell flat because I went years and years and years without a raise, years without, we didn't have performance evaluations. There was no HR department. There was none of that. So it wasn't like this great setup and great situation. Um and I just lost it. Everything that I had been feeling and all the anger I had experienced for 17 years, being stuck at what really was a dead end job, not only in a field that I wasn't interested in, but just something that emotionally sucked the life out of me. Whatever rage I had inside of me came out, and my boss was just floored because something she always used to tell me is, you should try sticking up for yourself. If a rude client comes in and I'm like, it's not even worth it for me. I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to do this. I hate this. So I think she was shocked because it was so uncharacteristic of me. And then she started saying things like, well, maybe I should get an attorney to deal with this, because I was telling her to her face, I'm like, you are a nasty person. And then she basically, because I started freaking out, I started getting like really heightened emotionally. And then she said, why don't you go for the day? Fine. It was a Friday. And I remember calling my wife on my way home from work saying, I don't know that I will be at this job that much longer. I kind of had like a moment today and told her about it. And she's like, well, let's see what happens. So I went to work on Monday, not knowing what to expect. And my boss basically said, here's what we're going to do. You are going to continue making the same amount of money that you're making now from now until the end of the year. Starting in October, you will work from 8:30 in the morning to noon, so you won't be working full time anymore. You'll just be working part time. And then in November, like the day before Thanksgiving, actually, that'll be your last day.
November 2019.
Yeah,
Got it.
November
Got it.
20.
Ooh,
And
okay.
And I said, okay. And it actually felt really good because for years, I don't think I've mentioned this so far, but I tried. I wish I had kept a running tally of how many jobs I had applied for that just didn't work out. Um, and I just think that I was so disconnected from who I was as a person that I probably wasn't even writing a compelling cover letter. It was just like, God, just somebody give me a job, get me out of here. I tried volunteering with nonprofits. I tried, reaching out to people I knew at the time saying, can you get me a job anywhere but here? So it actually felt kind of good. It was like, well, now the decision isn't up to me. I am going to be leaving this job and I do have to get a new one. So I started immediately. Sorry, should we break there? Do you have any questions about that?
Thanks for checking in. No, I don't have any questions right now. Continue, please. You're on a
Um,
roll. This is
so
like your canon event of like your midlife, I think, you know?
Yes, very much so. And there's something I forgot to tell you, so maybe I'll say it now and then you can plug it in later.
Oh
Do
yeah,
you
I
want to
mean
do
you just yeah, some
In 2000, I believe it was either 2017 or 18, the company that I was working for absorbed a huge book of business, which meant that we had then a new office. So we had the office in La Jolla where it was me, my boss, and her husband. My only two coworkers were a married couple that owned the company.
ooh,
And then they opened this office in Oakland, California, and they basically kind of poached these people from this other, like a competing organization that did similar work. So they opened this office in Oakland where they had like a new vice president and a director of marketing. And, we had never had that before. Like I said, we never got like performance evaluations. It was kind of just a mom and pop owned business. Even though it was a corporate business, it still got kind of chill in that regard. When the office in Oakland happened, that was a huge turning point because all of a sudden you had these people that were coming in saying, well, this is not the way that a proper organization should work, and this is how we should be doing it, and this is how we're going to do it. And I think they had like 10 people working up there. And I was like, God, this is so annoying. Not only have I hated this job the whole time, but now I have people telling me like, I'm sorry that you've been doing this job for 17 years, but we're going to tell you like that we're doing it a different way and whatever. And looking back, like from the people in Oakland, like from their perspective, I probably did come off as like, look, I don't want to hear from you, because I didn't. So they were like, God, wow, what a winner you have working down there for you in La Jolla, but I just didn't want to be bothered with it. I was over it. I was already volunteering for Lambda Archives. I was already kind of trying to figure out how to get out of that job. I had married my wife at that point. Things were shifting in a big way. But the opening of the Oakland office was kind of like the beginning of the end for me at that job. That's exactly what happened, because then there was all this tension. Well, we asked Nicole to do this and she didn't do it, or she didn't do it the way we asked, or whatever. There was all this weird tension, and it also just irritated me that they were there. It was like, God, I hate how this is changing. I didn't like it. So 2019, the blowout with my boss, and then if it had been anybody else, it would have been grounds for immediate termination, the things that were coming out of my mouth. But the thing is that I had been at that job for so long, and there were so many things that happened that were inappropriate that I'm sure part of them was kind of like, okay, not only have you given your time for the last 17 years, but also you kind of you we don't want you to, maybe they were, concerned with me suing or something, which I had no intention of doing whatsoever. But they gave me a package and basically said, this is the way we're going to do this. So the day before Thanksgiving 2019, I left, and that started a whole different journey for me that seems like it happened a million years ago, and not only really in terms of my career, but the world. I mean, the world doesn't even, it's
Yeah.
not even the same place. It was, you know, at first I thought, well, I'll start talking to people that I know and see if I can get a job working in the arts, because that's really what I wanted to do. But even then, I had no sense of direction. I was just talking to people that I knew, saying, "What do you think? Who's hiring? What could I do? What would I be good at?" And it was difficult, but I did have a job that I had interviewed for and felt really good about it, at a museum in Balboa Park. And I believe it was either my second or my third and final interview with them was held. I could have the date off slightly, but it was something like March 15th, 2020. And it was the first
What
time
a
I had ever,
day. What a
yeah,
day.
it was the first time I had ever used Zoom. I didn't know how to use it. I had my camera off the entire time. Like I had never
Of
even,
course.
yeah, I'm like, what is this? I don't know what this is, but it was, and the interview went well, and they're like, we're going to let you know, let's just let this whole like pandemic thing blow over and we'll get back to you, and we'll go from there. And then of
Get
course,
back to you in 2 weeks.
yeah, exactly. So it fell through, and then I just was on this path of there's nothing. But I think the thing, because the
Well,
time that I
there's nothing
spent on
because of the world, you know?
that, and that's a really important part to this, because the day before Thanksgiving, which was my last day, and the day
November of
before,
2019 is like when they first discovered COVID, like traces of COVID too.
right, yeah. So if you take like in whatever was left of November, December, January, and
Yeah.
February, I was really bummed. Like I was like, I feel like I'm not feeling so hot about this. I don't have a job. I don't know what to do. But then all of a sudden in March of 2020, like everybody I knew was unemployed. Everybody I knew was getting laid
Mm.
off. Everybody I knew was getting, so it was like all of a sudden it was like a huge boost to my mental health, because I wasn't the only one, and everybody was posting, "Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm scared. I tried to file for unemployment. They wouldn't return my call. It's a nightmare. What do I?" Everything that I was going through, all of a sudden the entire world felt like it was going through, and it was like this weird way that I was able to kind of connect with the moment in a way that I was still taking care of my mental health. I felt like I was in community in that way, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So then in COVID, right? Like you were realizing this career you had thought you wanted was not what you wanted. And then you're like, the world is also falling apart, but we're all falling apart together. How did you get to like your next job?
That was a tricky one. I had applied for a lot of jobs during the pandemic and had a couple of interviews. It really, like every other job I've ever had in my life, it kind of fell in my lap. I had somebody I knew of San Diego Pride, because they were a nonprofit, LGBTQ plus serving nonprofit here in San Diego, which Lambda was also, and Lambda and Archives was one of their community partners. And they had announced that they were hiring a grant writer. So somebody from Pride or somebody in the community said, "Why don't you apply for this? You've already written all these grants for Lambda. You're part of the community. You know the jam. You're relatively familiar with San Diego Pride." So I applied for it, and I was excited about it. But at the same time, I had applied for so many jobs and gotten like so many interviews that I was like, it probably won't happen, because that's how things are going for me right now. Um,
Mm.
but I submitted the application and got called for an interview, and then I started working there in February of 2022.
That's where we met.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were I don't know, it was very interesting mix between me, you, and then our manager Kelsey.
Yeah.
Because most of the time me and Nicole were just like cracking jokes. and trying not to laugh. And Kelsey would walk in like, "What are you two up to now?" And we're like, "Nothing."
Yeah. It was a
Um,
great combination, and, I think the only person I've ever said this to out loud is my wife, but, I do wonder often, actually, what would have happened to me and my well-being, the 3 of us didn't click the way that we did. Like, if I had started working there
mm,
and something weird would have happened where it wasn't gelling and it was toxic, I feel like it would have broken me at that point.
mm,
I really needed to be somewhere where I felt like I had allies and friends and people that were understanding of who I was and supportive and, you know, like, "Hey, do you," and, you and I started going for, like, bike rides, and we'd walk to the farmer's market. Like, that was something that, not since I worked at the hospital had I ever had, like, a friend at work. So it had been a long time, and I have said that to Megan many times, like, what would have happened if it would have been, like, this really weird, toxic thing? I don't know what I would have done. I don't know where I would have ended up, and I don't think I could have handled it for even, like, a day. I would have been like, "I'm out of here. Like, I can't do this." So it was very like, I've always been very thankful for the dynamic between the 3 of us because it gave me, like, that sense of hope that I needed desperately, like, that I was like, you can work somewhere where the work is meaningful, where the people are awesome, where you're clicking with people.
mm,
It's not you, because even though I know that those folks in La Jolla had their issues, if you work somewhere for 17 years where I really was going to work every day thinking, I hate this job and I hate these people, that does something to you. I mean, it really starts to chip away at very like a lot of different levels of your psyche, like internally. And I don't think I even realized it until I left, that it's like, man, that was rough, you know.
and you also convince yourself that you're not deserving of anything else, you know? Even the self-doubt you had, like, coming into working at our workplace at San Diego Pride. And just like, I didn't know you felt that way, because obviously I didn't know all of this about you when we met. But,
Yeah.
like, the thought of you just, like, potentially not wanting to work at an organization that served LGBT just because your coworkers might not gel with you, because like at the previous place the power dynamics were all obviously like very different with your mom and pop literally your only coworkers specifically.
Yeah.
Oh,
I don't think I knew at the time how desperately I needed it. And there was also a weird thing where when I went to work for Pride, I hadn't been interacting with people really. I was doing my own thing for
it's
2
true.
solid years. Like I was at home. I was getting up at 5 a.m. and going for a walk on the beach and then coming home and cleaning the house and doing it was hard. It was really, really difficult to even hold conversations. I found myself saying the weirdest things when people would say good morning. I just would like spaz out and start saying like the weirdest, like, what am I talking about? But I forgot to communicate with people. It was the most
Yes, yes.
thing.
So I know this. I want to, share it with like the listeners. Like you are obviously still volunteering at a capacity at Lambda Archives on their board while working at Pride. So how did you find yourself in your position that you have?
Yeah. So Lambda Archives, all I can really say about that is that when I started volunteering for them, which I actually started volunteering in 2015 and joined the board in 2018, but there was something about the work that was being done there that it's so critical, it's so important, and it's so overlooked, and it would make me mad even as a volunteer when people would be like, I don't know what you have going on over there, but I'm like, this is really important. This is really important what we have here. This is collecting, preserving, and sharing the LGBTQ plus history of San Diego, Imperial Valley, and Northern Baja California. We're a border region.
Yeah,
Um,
tell them what you do.
yeah, we're a military town, and we have more openly elected LGBTQ plus elected officials than even San Francisco. I think the most in the state of California, actually. So San Diego is an interesting place because of all of those dynamics. I feel like that just lends itself to it's an interesting place to be. And that history attached to it is fascinating. And some people that get really excited about the work that we do at Lambda sometimes are, self-described history nerds, but it's critical. Not only are we collecting the things we're collecting, but we're also building curriculum for schools, and we have youth programs, and it's just I've been in love with the work since I stepped foot into the organization. So what happened was during COVID, um, Lambda Archives is a relatively small organization comparatively to other organizations like San Diego Pride or our local LGBT center. Out of necessity, during the pandemic, we started applying for larger grants because we didn't know what was going to happen with the pandemic, and we didn't really rely on income for in-person events like other organizations do. But there were so many grants available for COVID relief and that kind of thing. So we started, during the pandemic, we actually doubled the annual operating budget for the organization based on a lot of those grants. It was really incredible. And then we were faced with the decision of what are we going to do with this money to make it a more sustainable organization, because since 1987 it's really been the board of directors that has been doing 100% of the fundraising for the organization, and it's not a sustainable model. It works for a
But
period of time, but
it's a very common model for nonprofits for those that are listening and don't know that. But sorry,
yeah,
continue.
yes. But it's definitely not like what happens, and we had seen that happen with Lambda throughout the years. What happens when you have all these people that are on the board that term out, and then all of a sudden you get a fresh group of volunteer board of directors that you have to figure out how to raise money for the rent, for the salaries, for the supplies, for the equipment. And we are volunteers, or at that time the board of directors, they're volunteer board of directors. So it's just, to be more sustainable, we decided to invest in a managing director position at Lambda. And I hesitated to apply for the position right away for a number of reasons. One, I felt like I was just kind of getting going at Pride, and I was like, do I really want to take, it was a chance, it was a risk, do I want to leave this place where I know that I'm like, I've got these friends and I know what I'm doing, and, or do I want to take this job, which sounds awesome, but also, what if I fail? Nobody's ever had this job at Lambda Archives before. I'd be the first one. So I'm building the plane as I'm flying it, as Kelsey used to say. Um,
That was quite the term for 3 years.
yeah. So, there was part of me that's like, I don't know, but the more we talked about the position and what we wanted it to look like and how it was going to serve the organization, for me, it really came down to this. It came down to, I did not leave a job of 17 years, suffer 2 years of unemployment during the pandemic, and go through all the shit that I have gone through specific to jobs over the years, only to now sit here and play it safe. So
Ooh,
it took me months to decide to apply for that job. It was not something that I decided lightly. My partner actually initially was like, I do not want you to apply for this job. I don't know. There's a lot of what ifs, there's a lot of unknowns. You're happy at Pride. I don't know about this, and I was like, no, 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 no. No. I am approaching 50 years old, and I did not burn my life down over and over again in a million different ways,
ooh.
and like not serve myself and not listen to myself, only so that now I could say, it's too much of a risk. So, and that's really, I think the pandemic, actually, the experience of having that job for 17 years and leaving in such a funny way, really, it was just telling my boss for the first time, like thinking the words for 17 years, but then actually saying them out loud, like, I hate this place. I hate everything about it. I'm done with it. And then the pandemic just gave me this different lens that I think it gave a lot of different people. Just like I said, I don't recognize the way the world was when I left that job in 2019. I do not. It's a completely different thing. Not
It is,
necessarily all
absolutely.
better. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
it's a different wild thing. It's stressful. I'm tired. People are tired. There's this like emotional fatigue that has accompanied all of these, world events. There's this meme that I love that goes around that says, I would love if I could just have 6 months where I don't have to live through a massive historical event, because that's what it feels like. It's this constant, like, "Ooh, this is rough for folks." and the toll that it has taken, but also I am no longer on this earth to not take chances, and that's really that's my thing now. Like it cannot
Yeah,
I'm not here to play it safe anymore.
I love that. I also think like so you were at Pride from 2022, and then when did you get the Lambda job officially? Was that
uh, I don't remember exactly. I got the official word maybe around like sometime in November, and then it was publicly announced sometime in December.
okay?
And
Gotcha.
then I
So
started
you've been
right
there.
after. Yeah, and then I started in January. I started the first week of January this year.
Okay, yeah. That's it's really interesting, right? Because like you are now at a place where you're willing to make exponential decisions like that and not allow yourself to go through another like slog of 17 years of like not asking for what you want. And how do you think you're curating that for like your employees since you are man I think you're managing people for the first time, but I don't know if you managed people at the previous job.
I have had experience managing people, although it has been a while since I've managed folks. And managing people is an interesting thing. It's for me the guiding principle that I try to always keep top of mind. And sometimes it's hard to remember this, but what I try to do, and this is a game that I play with myself. This is like a script that I give myself very often. It's like, think about what you're doing, think about how you're talking to people, think about the culture that you're creating, and then look back on your time. And if you like, are you doing any of the things that people used to do to you that would drive you up a wall, or
Ooh.
that, and that's really, it is actually quite illuminating, because there have been times where, from a manager perspective, it's like, there's this thing, it's got to get done, we got to do it, and the staff at Lambda are epic. They're brilliant. They're mindful. They're responsive. It's not anything like that, but sometimes I think I get myself so worked up about things, and then like communicating those things, it's like how soon you forget that people are human beings, that they have lives, that some of these folks work part-time, um, have other jobs possibly that they're working on to try and make ends meet. Like, are you treating them the way that you would want to be treated? And I think that I am. And if you ask them, I am 99.9% sure they would say that yes, that I do believe in radical empathy, from the standpoint that it's like the job can wait, but people need to be taking care of themselves. And it's true that I'm not their therapist and I'm not their BFF, and that's not what I'm there for. But it's also true that I can find a way to support, and a pathway to grow. That's the other thing, is that I think one of my big things as a manager is that at the end of the day, I really want folks to have a good life. I feel like so much of that was taken from me when I worked. It was like, you have to be here at 8:30 a.m. And if you are 5 minutes late, you're going to hear from us. You have to work until 4:30, because those are our hours. You can take lunch at noon, and that's the time you take lunch, but don't have it out, like try to bring it into the office.
Mhm.
Um, there was all this pressure, and now I'm like, wait a minute, that's not how this has to work at all. So I love that somebody feels comfortable enough to come to me and say, I have this standing appointment that's really important to me. It happens on Thursdays at 1 p.m. And I would, if it's okay, I'd like to not be here at that time because I want to do this other thing. And it's like, do it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, no, I don't think so. It almost is like creepy thinking about it now. I cannot imagine looking
Mm.
at a staff member in the face and saying,
I don't
"No,
know.
you're trying to take
Mm.
care of yourself and do this thing that's like a oh no, 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 no." It like yuck. But I feel like so many people and so many jobs are like that. And I do hope that it's changing, and I think that's another thing that we have that was kind of a I don't want to say a benefit of the pandemic. I don't want to use that, because it's like signals kind of an insensitivity to
So perspective. We use
the
perspective.
But, you know, it is kind of we can get our jobs done. We don't have to be here glued to a seat for 9 hours a day. What is gonna make your life good? Is it, you know, maybe coming in a little later because you wanna have coffee with your partner in the mornings or you wanna walk your dog? And I would, you know, when we worked at Pride, sometimes I would tell Kelsey, like, "I have my dog's going through an issue. I'd like to stay home today," and it was no big deal, but I've had jobs where that would have been an impossibility. Like, in order for me to
Yeah,
call off that day, I would have to be like, "I have the flu." I would never in a million
absolutely.
years be able to say, you know, "My dog isn't feeling good. He's on this weird new medication. I wanna stay home with him." You know, but stuff like that is so important. It's how we take care of ourselves, and that's really important to me, I think, as a manager is giving people freedom and, you know, as long as the job is getting done, then that's it. The work will
That's
always
true.
be there.
The work will always be there. Um, yeah, so cool hearing your story like in its full context like this. Um, I think I just have one last question, and it's kind of like to tie us off or tie us. I don't know, whatever the expression is for closing us out. But okay, I have two questions.
Okay.
One is there anything you feel like you're holding on to right now in the ways that you have shared with us in the past, in your career, you know, in your identity? Yeah. So if you want to answer that, I know that's kind of a big question. But
Is there anything I'm hanging on to? Was that the question?
yeah, is there anything you're holding on to that you have not addressed? You know,
Mm, no, not that I can think of.
I feel like you've gone through like several canon events. Uh, so
No.
that answer is not surprising to me, you know.
Yeah,
And obviously, I'm biased because I know you personally, but
right.
it's cool. It's cool. Um, I'm really happy for you. I want to ask you my final question, which is like, what are your dreams and goals now? You know, what are the conditions you have yet to create for yourself that you want?
That is a really interesting question. A couple of weeks ago, my partner asked me what I would envision myself doing if I left Lambda. To
Ooh,
which I actually don't have an answer to that at all because my hope is that I'll be at Lambda for the rest of my working life, which is just under 20 years, which is a long time. So, and I also have had enough experience to know that, you know, things change very rapidly and sometimes you don't have control over those things. But I just hope that, you know, I don't have any goals in terms of like, I don't think of things and say, oh, well, this is my next thing is that I want to, you know, be the executive director of, you know, or the I don't know. I don't think that
yeah,
way, and I didn't think that way
yeah,
with Lambda. It wasn't for me, it wasn't like, "Ooh, this is a stepping stone to my next goal," which is
yeah,
this was just
and
like,
and
yeah, this
yeah,
is the thing right now, and I think I've
and I
always
think
Go ahead.
that's a really good mark of a leader, by the way, is that your next thing is making the organization as great as possible right now. You know, because if you're using the org as a stepping stone, you're not in the right org.
Right, right, and I do like, I've actually had this conversation with Megan, I'm like, you know, I for the life of me, I cannot picture I don't know what I would do. You know, I can't see myself working in a corporate environment. I At one point during the pandemic, I went through this thing where I was about to give up really and looking for jobs and I was about to apply for a job at Trader Joe's because to me it just seems like such a peaceful job, you know, that you go there, you are stocking food, they give you discounts on the food and everything that's there. Everybody seems like really happy, you know, you're kind of chill. And I truly, that's the way I look at, I know that sounds funny, but I don't have really any goals beyond this because everything to me is about in the job, making Lambda a better place and making sure that the staff is taken care of and that they have the tools needed to succeed, whether they stay at Lambda forever or move on, whatever it is that they're doing. But aside from that, for me personally, it's really just, I don't know. And I've always had a lack of my future in terms of my career or even school. It was just always like, well, I guess I'm going to go here now and take underwater basket weaving or whatever they have on Slate. I don't know what's going on here. It was always just like, yeah, that's fine. And when teachers would be like, now you're going to get a B minus. And if you would have done these things, you could have gotten an A. I was like, that doesn't interest me at all. Like, I'm satisfied with the knowledge that I absorbed here, and thanks for the B minus. That's really awesome. I'm good on that. And yeah, I don't know. I have vision galore for certain things in my life, but yeah, things like that are not one of them. I'm like, as long as I can get to the beach and I can ride my bike and I can still go to concerts and I don't have to I can't picture myself ever doing what I did before, which was the hard, like the commuting for 45 minutes every day, and your ass in the seat at a certain time, and the lunchtime at a certain time, and the people that don't even have the slightest clue about the queer community, and a very oppressive.
Uneducated.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it just. But I hella have like a lack of vision for that, and I always have. It's always been like a fumbling. My parents got me the job at the hospital. I applied for a job through a temp agency, and they called me back and said, we have a job at this trust company. And then through that, I found out that one of our competitors was in San Diego. So I called them and said, hello, I've been working up here and I'm wondering if I could work down there. And they said, yeah, come on down. And everything has been kind of like I feel like I'm like a Muppet walking through my career, like, okay, now this is the thing, and even though, so there's a word, I'm going to look it up, that perfectly describes cottywomple.
Cottywomple.
It's to travel in a purposeful manner towards a vague destination. And I feel like that is so perfect because, I was really going to school was not my favorite, but I did it all on my own. I didn't have parents saying you have to go to school and you have to graduate in 4 years and we're going to help you with your tuition. I did that because I felt like it was an important thing to do. And it took a really long time. And then when I got my bachelor's, I was like, oh, maybe my master's. And then I got my master's. But there was never like, something in my brain that said, and when you get this bachelor's, you will do this. And when you get your master's, you're going to do this. It was just always like, I felt such conviction about what I was doing, but I don't think I have ever had this outcome designed in my mind about what benefits would be at the end of this tunnel, and I don't think that my journey is anywhere near over. But yeah, cottywompling.
I love how you I love how you think it's like aimless, but I feel like you really have come into yourself a lot in the last like few years since you left that job of 17 years. There's a lot of choice, like you chose LGBT serving organizations over other ones, to volunteer your time at and then to try out for those kinds of jobs too. And I think what's meant for us does come to us eventually. And I think you're meant to be right here. And like, again, I know you personally, so I know you're kind of living the life you've always like dreamed of, like having access to all these things and then serving a community intentionally. So I don't know if that's really cottywomple at this point. Like I feel
Yeah,
like you have created exactly where you are now, to be possible for you.
yeah, I just could have never imagined it. Like, it was never, sometimes I talk to people that are younger than me and they're like, well, I'm going to this university where I will be majoring in this and minoring in this, and then when I get out I'm going to do this program, and then I'm going to spend a few months in Europe, and then when I get back, you're kind of like that. um, and it always like is like, oh man, like that is wild that folks can and do that, because I've never had that. I am a planner in like a lot of different ways, but that is not one of them.
And that's okay. You don't have to
Yeah,
be. You're the boss of like an organization now, like, telling people what to do at this point.
it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I have no more questions, but I'm really glad that you came on this podcast with me, and my first episode of this podcast.
Yeah. Where can people catch
Is
this?
there anything else? What's up?
Where can people catch this podcast when it's live?
It'll be on Spotify.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I'll probably also upload it to YouTube. Um, but I wanted to ask you: is there anything else you wanted to share with people about, the conditions that you've been given or that you created for yourself in life?
No, like for me, yeah, just a final message would be that it's difficult because if somebody had told me these words when I was in my 20s, it would have really irritated me. I think sometimes you just have to live through the thing to actually look back and be able to say, I see. You know, that's why things didn't work out the way I wanted to in my 20s because it had to happen that way for me to end up where I am today. So, I don't want to sound like a, Montessori school mom, but work hard. And the one thing I could really give advice, because I think this is where I never, ever until even during the pandemic was I able to grasp this is whatever you do or wherever you go to school or whatever it is that you're doing, make sure that it aligns with your values somehow because that never
Hmm.
registered for me. And when I look back on it, it's like, man, I really did hang in there and listen to the most homophobic, misogynistic stuff and see like some of this abuse happening in the workplace and just kind of thought to myself, this is how the world works. This is what it is to have a job. You sometimes have to suck it up and just go through this stuff. And it's like there was nothing in my brain that ever clicked because that wasn't a value that was passed on to me by my family either that said, you deserve more than this. And everybody deserves more than that. Everybody
Hmm.
deserves to be somewhere where they feel safe. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing or, how you're doing it or anything, as long as you feel that you are in a place that is supportive and value aligned with you. I think that's very, very important.
Hmm. I love that.
Yeah.
And also that people deserve that, you know? Like
Yes.
society does a lot of convincing us you don't deserve this. So like let's just put you in a box and this is what you're gonna believe you can have.
Yeah. And they really do.
Well,
Whoever they is, whether it's, a system or a person or an individual, that thinking is very corrosive and it's everywhere seemingly, but it can be really destructive. And look at what happened when I let go of that. It like all of a sudden the ball started rolling. And I'm not saying that I don't want to sit here and be one of these people that's like, oh, let the universe come to you. Because I don't believe in that crap. There was something very powerful about letting go, letting go all of that stuff that didn't serve me. And the pandemic kind of forced me to sit with that. It was like, well, now what? Now I have to like kind of unpack this shit, and it was useful to have that time to do that.
yeah, that's true. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast. I have no further questions. We have gone way over an hour, and I have no issues with that because I've loved getting to know more about like your trajectory to get to where you are.
Yeah.
So thank
Thanks for
you.
inviting me on. I can't wait to hear the final version.
Yeah. And where can folks find you or your work?
Yeah. So you should check out Lambda Archives at Lambda Archives on Instagram and Facebook.
All right. Cool.
All right.
Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you, Nicole, for being here. Thank you for being my friend and being so open today.
Yeah. I
Appreciate
love
you.
you so much. Thanks for inviting me on.
Love you. All right. I'm going to hit. Okay. Bye, everybody.